Alright, we're now routing traffic to our login page, or we would be if we actually had a login page. We're trying to, but since we haven't created one yet, we're seeing this error. So let's go ahead and create the login page so that the user will actually see something here instead of this ugly error. So go back to your text editor and let's create a new file, but we'll create it inside of the views folder because that's where all of our pug templates go. So in the views folder, I'll right click on it and create a new file, and this will be login.pug because again it's a pug template. And then we are also going to do one more, and that's going to be the login layout pug. Just like we have this main layout one, we're going to create one for the login layout too. So in the layouts folder, create another new file called login layout.pug. Now the reason we're doing this in a layout is because the login page will actually have some code that we want to duplicate to another page, and that's the register page. So we'll have two pages eventually, one for handling the login and one for handling the registration. Now, the style and the visuals of the two pages will look very similar, which is why we're going to create a layout, this login layout one, which the register page and the login page are both going to use. But for now, what we can do is go to our login.pug and we can say extends layout / login layout.pug. This is just like we did in the main layout file, in the home.pug file. We extended the main layout like this, and we're going to do the same thing down there with this block content eventually. But let's just first go back to the login layout file and actually put some stuff in there. So remember what we said last time? I said if you type in HTML and go down to this :5 one right here and press enter or click on it, you'll see it fills in this for us, which is pretty good. Now we're not going to have document as the page title, we're just going to have login like that. Now obviously this means that this would show on the register page too when we create it, because like I said, we're going to use this login layout eventually there too. So if you really wanted to, you could go and do what we do in the main layout where we do use dynamic content, but it means you'd have to actually specify, you'd actually have to pass in a payload like this with the page title in. But if you wanted to do that, you'd just do that in the login routes file. See here, you'd just create the payload here, and then you'd pass it in as the second variable right there. But it's not too important. I'm not too bothered about changing the page title there. So there's just a couple of things we need to do in here. In the body, we're going to create a div. So we can add our div like this, and if you want to give it a class, what you do is you say dot and then whatever the class is. So we can say wrapper, because it's going to be a div with the wrapper class. And when I press enter then, you saw that it got rid of the div part. And that's because in Pug, if you don't specify the name of the element, it will assume it's a div. So when you just do a dot wrapper like this, it's the same as if you did div dot wrapper like that. Okay, so yeah, when I press enter on that, it got rid of the div the first time round. The second time it didn't do it. But just know that not having the div and just specifying a class means that it will assume that this element is a div. Okay, so the last thing to do in there is just say block and then content like that. And then in the login pug is where we're going to add this part right here. So in the login.pug, just like we did with our home page, underneath there, we will say block content, and then let's put something in there. So we'll just create a div and say login container. So remember, because it's a div, I didn't specify div, it will assume that. And then we'll create an h1 block and we'll say login. And then let's go ahead and create our form. So we'll create a form. So I can go down and choose between get and post right here. So if I press enter on post, you can see it added this part right here. Now when we submit this form, we want to essentially just send it to the page we're on at the moment. So what we're going to do is remove that action entirely. We can leave it there. If you don't specify an action, it will default to sending it to the page you're already on, but it's fine. We will just leave it like that. And then let's go ahead and create some inputs, and these are going to be the text fields that we use to log in. So input. Now you've got a bunch of options here. So what I'm going to do is go down and find the one with input type text. So if I go to keep going, there, it's right down on the list, input text. But what you can do though, if you didn't want to scroll down to it, you could just write this out. So I could do input colon and then text and then press enter, and it's the same thing as if I just manually selected it. So you can see this added this pound sign right here, and that's because it wants me to add some ID to it. So you could add an ID like username text box if you really wanted to, but we're not doing anything with this, so I'm just going to get rid of it. But if you wanted to add an ID, you could. So anyway, this input is going to be of type text, and the name of the input is going to be, let's just call it log username, like this, and this is going to be what we use to access the data from this text field. Let's go ahead and add a placeholder. So you can see we're adding these attributes in a slightly different way, where these are comma separated attributes, whereas obviously when we just add attributes to HTML tags, we don't specify a comma separated list like this. So this is one thing that's slightly different. But anyway, we'll say a placeholder equals, and this will be a username or email, because we want to allow them to sign in with either of those two things. We'll press a comma, and then we'll also, we want to add the required field. Now required just makes it so you can't submit the form without this field having a value. Now, we can't just add the required attribute like this. Usually when you create a text block, let's say it's like this, if we're using actual HTML, it would be type equals text like that, and then yeah, if we wanted to make this required so the user has to put a value in there, we would just add required like that. We wouldn't have to add any value to this, we'd just add the word required. But we can't just add single words like this in Pug, so what we actually need to do is just say required equals, and then put an empty quotes in there, and that will just add the word on its own. So let's just duplicate that. So I'm going to copy and paste this line below, and then we're going to do something very similar, but this is going to be for the password. So the type is going to be password, the name is going to be log password, placeholder is going to be password, and then required is also going to stay like that. Okay, we've got one more to do, and that's the submit button. So we'll say input, and then we'll do a colon, and I'll just say submit like this, and press enter on that, and it'll fill that in for me. And then the value is just going to be login. And then underneath there is one more thing we're going to do actually, and that's just to add a link which takes the user to the register page if they're not logged in. So I can press A, and then press enter, and it adds this href attribute for me, and the href is just going to be /register like that. Alright, and then just give the link some text. So need an account, and then register, here, like that. Okay, we had a lot of stuff then, I know. As always, if any of that didn't make sense, feel free to let me know, but let's go ahead and try this out. So we want to actually stop the server and then restart it. And if I go back to here and refresh the page now, we see our login page. Great. So I know it's not styled yet, but all the stuff is there. And if I inspect on that, you'll see we've got all the correct HTML. So you can see the required part there from a specifying required equals empty string. You can see it's added it to, you can see it's added the attribute right there. So all the HTML looks as you'd expect. And of course, if we press this link, we're going to see an error which says that there's no route which handles the register. So we will get to that shortly. But yeah, that's it, guys. That was a lot of stuff, I know. So take a moment and just make sure you understand it all. And yeah, like I said, let me know if you have any questions.